Thank you um, very much for those kind words, Jack. Um, I'm going to talk a little bit about spatial optimization and its role that it can play in conservation biology. And I'm going to do that by going over three different problems that I've actually been involved in um, over the last 15 years. Before I really start, I do want to say that it would be impossible for me to have been involved in a lot of this work without a lot of supportive colleagues. And I want to acknowledge the uh, following principal collaborators that I've been involved with. Mike Gilpin he's a professor emeritus from UC San Diego, Peter Stein from the US Forest Service. He was very instrumental in the Sierra Nevada ecosystem framework, which he managed for a number of years. Klaus Barber, the analyst for the Forest Service in Region 5, which includes California. Lance Craighead, whose fame is in the grizzly bear protection at Craighead Institute. Ross Gerard, who now was one of my students and is now working with the Forest Service, and a number of other people, including Matt Niblett, Stuart Sweeney, David Stomps, and Frank Davis. As I said, I couldn't have done all of this without having at least some support from them in terms of specific actions involving animals and other issues. I also want to acknowledge that I've had a lot of funding associated with conservation biology, and that includes the National Center for Ecological Analysis and Synthesis, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the U.S. Forest Service, the California Forestry Association, the World Bank, the Craighead Institute, and the Sierra Nevada Ecosystem Project, which is actually funded by Congress. With that, I have a couple caveats, few background notes. My research focus is centered on spatial optimization and applied to many fields, as what Jack has said. I also approach all of my research with an attempt to develop a mathematical optimization problem to be as efficient as possible in solving real-world problems. And the common element in all of this is the concept of a model and its potential application. All of my research has involved subject matter experts in the field of application. They keep me straight. I won't attempt to describe all the underpinnings of the mathematics, except to give you a high-level conceptual view and focus on the results. But the issue is I want to convince you that spatial optimization and, of course, GIS has a role to play in conservation biology. Now, the other thing is the literature is large. I won't address certain things that might pop up into your mind as I'm giving this talk about Marxand, Sipes, Patch Analysts, Fragstats, as my time is limited. And I'm also not going to say a lot about climate warming and climate change because of the fact that there's only a limited time for me to talk today. So decision making oftentimes is cast within a scale. High level, we might ask questions, where should we target our investments in protecting as many species as possible? Mid-level, we might ask questions like just what land parcel should be a part of a reserve site? What levels of connectivity can we ensure between sites? How many of a given species will a site or area support? This is a real problem for a territorial species. And I will describe some of that in a few minutes. And of course, on a micro level, what makes a habitat work, support a species? And Jack has done quite a bit of work on panda bears, and he has found certain things that are defy the conventional wisdom of exactly what the panda bear habitat is, and I can tell you that virtually every species that I've been involved in planning for, that is also an element that has to be underscored. We don't have good understanding of what is needed oftentimes. Okay, so decision making should be based on an understanding of what makes up a good habitat. And that is the role of a wildlife habitat relationship model. In California, they're called California wildlife habitat relationship models for the species of interest. And we also would like to know whether a given species is present or absent at a given location, but oftentimes we don't even know that. And then finally, these wildlife habitat models represent what, as we say, the presumed or known relationships between a species and the various environmental components that are needed for survival and reproduction. And when I'm saying this is known relationships and presumed, because sometimes our presumptions are wrong. So scale, the outline of my talk is kind of scale defines in part our decisions, micro, meso, macro. You can think of these as being strategic, high-level models, tactical models, a little bit more focused, and then operational models in terms of actually working on the landscape at a specific parcel. So I'm going to give you a macro example in just a moment, a meso example, and kind of a micro example of three different species of concern here. So in a macro level model, the question might be, where do we target land purchases to protect species? Now, this is not exactly where, but general areas to target. And this is sort of a strategic assessment. And it's a problem that's been faced by the Natural Conservancy and in national planning. And so what I'd like to do is give you an example of a model that has actually been solved for the Nature Conservancy in my labs by Ross Gerard. So we can, if we look at the United States map, we can see that this is a map of threatened and endangered species by state and territory. You can also see here that there's 7 species that are threatened or endangered actually in the District of Columbia. You can see that there's some very rich areas in terms of biodiversity, hotspots, if you will. Hawaii is one of them. California is another one. And there's some areas that are really kind of very, very unique. Tennessee and Kentucky share a river, a watershed of the Clinch River. And there are a number of freshwater mussels and other species that are present there that are not present anywhere else. And the only way to protect them would be to protect certain elements of the Clinch River. So that there are some very specific areas that we should target, but in general, where would the Nature Conservancy target for looking for parcels and specific species to protect? This is this is a map of occurrences of imperiled and threatened species. You'll notice that, of course, this mimics a little bit of what I said before. California has a significant amount of biodiversity. Parts of Florida do as well. And there you'll see that coastal areas and certain watersheds are particularly important. So Alaska has, I believe it's 8, not very many, whereas Hawaii has more than 340 species that are either threatened or in peril, and a lot of these are birds. The element, if we look at it, in a different way. This is an E-map that was produced by one of the labs of the Nature Conservancy. And this E-map, these are hexagons, and these represent, if you will, each hexagon that's colored represents species that it contains a species of concern. The more species that it has in that hexagon of concern, the redder the color. Starts with blue, then green, yellow, red. And overall, if you can see at the bottom of this chart here, there are 4,743 occupied hexagons. So there are 4,743 specific areas that we might want to target in order to protect species that are imperiled or threatened. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that we would be taking the hexagon, but the hexagon represents the area that the Nature Conservancy would be looking for species to protect by specific parcels. So what I want to do here is, okay. So the model that was chosen by the Nature Conservancy was what we call the species set covering problem, and it represents a problem where we want to minimize the number of sites chosen. In this case, it's hexagons. Remember, we're talking about a very high level, high scale, a large scale problem here. The hexagon represents the area that we'd focus on parcels where we actually protect a species, but we want to minimize the number of these hexagons that we choose for targeting in order to represent each of these species, imperiled and threatened species, at least once. Now, you can do it at least twice or three times if they're present in at least two or three hexagons. But right now, I'm just going to focus on what the Nature Conservancy did. It represents an optimization model which contains, there are 4,500 hexagons with something, and 2,700 species. And technically, if we looked at it as a matrix of sites versus species and so forth, this would be a matrix of about, I think, 12 million elements. Thus, the idea is that we want to, we can't target everything because we don't have the resources. So what sites are the best ones? And of course, that's where the sites have overlap. And there are overlap because species may be represented in several different hexagons. And so if you pick one hexagon that represents a species, you don't necessarily have to pick any of the others for that specific species in order to protect everything or represent everything at least once. So the species covering problem represents basically a mathematical optimization problem. It's a combinatorial one in what we're trying to select from 4,500 sites. We're trying to cover, if you will, and cover means if a site, a hexagon has a species present, then if we pick that hexagon, it represents that we've covered that species. So we want to cover all the species. That's what this constraint here says. For each species of concern, we write a constraint that says we have to choose at least one of the sites that contain that species. And so if you look at the top right screen, part of the screen there, you'll see that J represents sites, the index J, index I represents species. So our decision variables are these binary variables in our model that says basically that our decision is xj. It's 0 if we don't choose that hexagon, but xj is 1 if the hexagon is chosen. So all of our species in the model are binary variables at constraint number 2. There's, as I said, there's 4,500 of these binary variables and 2,700 of these coverage constraints. And what it amounts to is that the set of sites that contains a species in species I, the sites that contain it, we sum over the sites that contain that particular species of our decisions, and at least one of those decisions has to be 1. Kind of simple in a way. And then the objective function is to minimize the number of hexagons that we've chosen. So what was the result of this problem? This represented, the solution was 933 hexagons, which is a lot less than the total number of hexagons that we started out with, 4,500. And as you can see here, it focuses on some of the places that we would recognize as being very strong hotspots: California, the Clinch River, and some of the other drainages to the Tennessee River and Florida and so on. Now, this represents something that was done by Ross Gerard, who was working with me first as a PhD student and later on as a research assistant professor at UCSB. And we actually not only applied this model to the TNC data and provided with them, and this is the map that they produced from our solutions, but we've actually looked at more specifically how this problem can be solved more efficiently. A different topic than what I can cover today. So let's turn our attention to a meso-level problem. Suppose you have a site or a region, for example, a Forest Service ranger district or a county, and what and where is core habitat? Now, and what population of given species will it support? We'll look at this in a bit descriptively, and then I'll talk about a spatial model that solved for the U.S. Forest Service. Now, here I'm going to start with some assumptions. We have a map of habitat suitability, and it may be based upon a wildlife habitat relationship model. It may be determined by GARP or MaxEnt or some other ecological niche technique. It may be based upon telemetry data, sightings, et cetera, because we could be tracking specific animals. And it could be processed by kernel density function, a convex hull, et cetera. But we have what we think is a habitat suitability map. And oftentimes this map is more, if you have ever used FragStats, you'll know that you just need to know what's habitat and what's not, 0-1. Oftentimes that's not really a 0-1 case. Where it's not, there can be grayscale in terms of this is habitat, but it's not as good as this other area that is the same kind of habitat, but it's higher quality and it's larger in size. So the task at hand here is to delineate core habitat on the landscape and then estimate carrying capacity. Excuse me. This was a question that was asked of me by Lance Craighead at Craighead Institute, because they were going to write a book on conservation techniques that is published by Esri, the company that produces ARC map and so forth. So that was the question he had of me. What is core habitat? How do we know what's core? And oftentimes we have definitions for core. For instance, the mountain quail needs a continuous area of habitat of medium to high quality. Now there's that gradation of habitat quality that you don't necessarily have in certain problems where you're looking for core, because Frankstats will give you core, but and they usually define that by taking away a certain buffer around habitat of suitable quality. But oftentimes we want to know more. That is, that we want to have some level of quality associated with that. A continuous area of habitat of medium to high quality, and in continuous use by the species successful enough to produce offspring that disperses. Now, the marten, which is a weasel-like animal found in the United States, it requires 30 to 50 square kilometers, pretty sizable area, 75% of which is suitable stands, overstory of which at least 40% cedar, spruce, and pine, and it has a canopy closure of 75%. This is a pretty well defined need for the marten, and we oftentimes have these definitions of core due to a number of biologists that have been studying specific animals, plants, and so forth. To delineate core on a map, anyway, you need to start with a map of habitat suitability or quality. And I'm going to say this needs to be ratio scaled values if at all possible. And if you're not familiar with habitat suitability scoring and so forth, I suggest maybe you might want to read my book. An egregious, it's a little bit of egregious of me suggesting you read my book, but the idea is that if you don't follow the rules of various kinds of data sources, like categorical data, nominal data, or interval data in terms of how it's measured, you can violate various mathematical manipulations, and whatever you end up with is not valid. It's in error. And in fact, a lot of suitability maps even do this. Ian McHarg's classic book on design with nature violates all of the rules of data manipulation. It produces a pretty map, but it's not necessarily a good. Okay, so definition of core. We oftentimes need a definition of core and shape, quality, connectedness, and approaches to identify where core exists. Oftentimes we might use some level of GIS function, like a focal mean score and so forth, and we might employ metrics and functions from Fragstats and patch analysts and so forth. But I will tell you that they don't really completely solve the problem. And I'll give you a good example of what I call R separation method for estimating effective core size. And so the California spotted owl is a species of concern in planning. It's considered to be threatened, but not endangered in California. And the range includes most along southern California and the Sierra Nevadas. Primarily, the Sierra Nevadas are the major range. And I'm going to talk about the Kings River Study Area, which is a part of the Sierra National Forest in the Sierras. This is the Kings Canyon. This is the this is a ranger district. It's roughly 130,000 acres just north of Kings Canyon National Park. Has been the subject of a long-term owl monitoring project by the Forest Service. And in this particular map, there are 29 NISS, and they're principally found at 5,000 to 7,500 feet, although they do go lower. It depends upon the quality and level of the habitat and also the time of year. Canopy cover density has been used as a surrogate measure for the California spotted owl, and the dense forests are a known habitat preference for the spotted owl. And usually can be found in late seral stage forest, canopy closure of at least 50% or more within, we'll say, the PAC, which is a protected activity center. I do want to say that late seral stage, we're talking about old growth in general, and this provides a lot of cavities in trees which are the favorite for the nesting sites for the owl. Okay, so what can we start out with? We can start out with an ARC coverage map available for the Kings River study area, and is classified coarsely by the California Wildlife Habitat Relationship categories. But this was a vector map. We needed to convert it to a raster map because we wanted to pursue the use of a GIS function called focal mean. And I'll describe that in a second. Here is a raster map of the portion of the Kings Ranger District showing owl nest sites. The canopy closure of, if you look at this map here, the dark green canopy closure is somewhere between here 60 and 100%. And the lighter colors are much lower levels, and you can see that the spotted owl is not found in those areas where the canopy closure is less than 50% in general. Now, the owls are found when the average density of canopy closure is about 50% for the surrounding 600 acres. And this is something that has been studied for quite some time. And this is the definition of what they consider, the Forest Service considers to be, we'll say, a density defined core. You have to have an area where each of the nest sites, prospective nest sites, has to be in an old growth stand or an older growth stand, and that the canopy closure in the surrounding circle, if you will, is greater than 50%. Now, to find that out, we need to develop we can do on the map, we can do a focal mean score at each pixel on the map. And that focal mean score represents the average of the canopy that is in the circle surrounding that pixel. So it's sort of like a moving window approach, where we're actually computing out exactly what is on the map within a 600 acre circle around a given point. And so what we're looking at here is this map. And you can see here, there's a couple of spotted owls that are in the 40 to 59%. So there can be error in the map and in the vegetation data. But I can assure you that these levels are probably closer to 50% or higher than 50%, than 45% or lower. So just making do. Okay, so if a circular area of size R composed of core habitat is large enough to support a territorial species like the spotted owl, then how many circular territories can be drawn within an area of the core habitat without overlapping? And what this is this is an estimate of the maximum carrying capacity. And you can imagine the following scenario. Let's say you have a total in a region, let's say in a county, you say, oh, we've got 1,000 acres of core habitat. And let's say it takes at least 500 acres of core habitat, connected core habitat, to support a given species. Let's say a demographic unit of a species. And let's say the core habitat of this 1,000 acres is spread around, and there's 5 parcels completely separated of 200 acres each. Then even though that it's defined as core, it can't support very much, if anything, because it's not large enough. And so this issue of being large enough is something that is a little bit harder to identify without a spatial model. So what we need to do is not only we need to calculate the effective usable habitat, and conceptually, what we want to do is we want to know how many circular territories we can draw on this map that are centered on a cell in which the average canopy cover in the surrounding 600 acres is greater than 50%, and that these circular territories don't overlap. Now, owl territories do overlap to some extent, but beyond the 600 acres, if they're larger than that. Okay, so how do we do this? We map the habitat values on a raster. We will run the focal mean score, as I said before, to find viable center points for these owl territories. And then we solve a spatial optimization model to maximize the number and placement of circular territories that do not overlap, that are centered in areas that represent at least 600 acres, surrounding 600 acres that are good habitat. So this is some notation for the model, and I'm just going to say that this is similar in a way. We have a variable that represents whether we've chosen a circle center selected or not. And then we also have, we have to be concerned about whether one circle overlaps with another circle. And we can think of this in 2 different ways. And here's circles 1, 2, and 3 representing potential owl nest sites, and they all overlap in this red area here. And that means that they mutually overlap, and we call that in the mathematics field, we call that a clique set. And so the clique set here would be members 1, 2, and 3, and you can only, if you chose one of these as a circular territory to represent where the owls might be, you can't choose the others because they're too close. And the same way with 4, if you choose 1, you can't choose 4, or if you choose 4, you can't choose 1 because there's an overlap. And that's what we call a neighborhood overlap. So the problem represents that you can only choose 1 in a clique set, and you can only have at most 1 of neighbors. You can't have neighbors overlapping, and you want to maximize the number of circles selected. This is not a simple problem mathematically. It's very simple to describe it, but the problem here is one of size. For the Kings Canyon area of the Sierra National Forest, the map contains more than 74,000 raster cells that are feasible for being a NIST/patch center. And the average number of overlaps per feasible center with other feasible center sites is, is very, very large. So we're talking about if we take just 5% of the feasible sites and we solve this model called the R separation location model, with 5%, we have approximately 4,200 pixel sites that we say we select at random. We have approximately 450,000 pairwise constraints. That's the neighborhood constraints, and another 50,000 pairwise kind of conditions represented by clique constraints. Now, this can be solved fairly fast with a package called Cplex that is sold by IBM Corporation, but we can't solve the entire problem optimally. So we've solved it both optimally for a random sampling and heuristically for the entire sampling of 74,000 potential sites. This is a view of the modeling interface that I provided to the Forest Service. And if we solve on the, here's a solution to the R separation location problem, and it involves 58 circular territories. This means that um, this, this habitat cannot support any more than about 58 owl nest sites. If we wanted to start with a beginning, that is an existing nest sites in the yellows, and then solve the problem, we come up with 57. So the owls that are currently occupying this landscape are not necessarily preventing others from occupying nearby areas. And one of the reasons why the Forest Service wanted to do it this way was that they have plans for treating this landscape for fire reduction, reducing wildfire risk. And these are called specially placed locations for treatments. That's their term, not mine. Splats, the Forest Service. And so if we will, we can simulate the vegetation because they have vegetation simulators. We can simulate the vegetation, its impact on the forest and canopy cover, and then rerun the model and then find out what the effect of this carrying capacity is after a certain number of these future treatment areas are accomplished. Now, what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about patch defined core. We just defined it with a circle, but there are several various ways we can do that. If you do frag stats, it's buffer defined core, but it doesn't necessarily handle all circumstances, and it's not. It violates the problem of having 1,000 acres and 500 acre units, and it will tell you it's got 1,000 acres of core when indeed core in any area, specific area, is not large enough, not connected enough. Density defined core, which we just did with the R separation location model, but let's do patch defined core. And I don't have very much time to do this, but we were tasked by the National Center for Ecological Analysis and Synthesis to look at protecting the San Joaquin kit fox in its most northern eastern part of its range in California, in Alameda and Contra Costa counties. They're the East Bay counties for San Francisco. And the Contra Costa County includes Richmond. This is the Sacramento River here at the top of the map of the county. Walnut Creek, Antioch, other towns, and This represents a map produced by John Landis of UC Berkeley in terms of land use, modeling, trying to estimate where sprawl would occur. So we know kind of where we expect habitat maybe to be degraded. This is Alameda counties, and this up here, this is Contra Costa County, and Oakland and Berkeley is really on the edge of Contra Costa County and Alameda counties. And this is all urban area down here. And Lawrence Livermore is here, for example. Now, a panel of experts was tasked with scoring habitat suitability and define the requirements for rated pair of kit fox. Kit fox generally mate for life, and the habitat suitability was defined in terms of two components: a intrinsic value in terms of the pixel on the map. In this case, it was a 200-meter pixel, and then a neighborhood effect, not just the pixel itself, but what are the neighboring spatial units. We had a habitat grid of various land use categories, from grassland, scrubland, emergent wetland, and so forth. These were scored by the panel of experts. Grassland had a score of 4. Oak and riparian woodland had 0. It means that it was neither supportive nor was it hazardous for the kit fox. Crop and orchards -2. Same thing for wetlands. Open water -4. Urban -20. Notice that, -20. So we also had a neighborhood effect. As I said, we had the intrinsic value and the neighborhood effect. And so depending upon what the neighboring pixels were, we would either add or subtract various values according to this plan. Now, this was supposed to generate what we would call ratio scale data. So we can add and multiply and so forth this data. So the final suitability map looks something like this. The colors were chosen by ArcMap. Not a great level of choice, but -20, this is like the sort of urban core here on an interstate highway. This is a road, a fairly sizable road. The best habitat is this area in here, the dark brown. Okay. So the panel of experts also defined, and I've got about 3 minutes left here, so I've got to speed up a bit. They said a habitat for a mated pair of kit fox should be at least 4 square miles of habitat. That's 256 cells of this 200-meter cells. They require at least what they call 1,536 habitat quality points. Now, this would be 256 cells of high-quality habitat that is of a score of 6. High quality means 4, and an intrinsic, and the neighborhood effect gives it 2 more. So it's a high quality habitat within high quality habitat gives you that value. So 4 square miles. Any feasible patch must be relatively compact. And so what it amounts to is we developed a heuristic that could generate hundreds, if not thousands, of possible patches within this landscape. Now, so we need a suitability map, a patch size equivalent, like the 4 square miles. We start with a seed cell. We iteratively add perimeter cells. In each iteration, we add a percentage of the top valued perimeter cells to the patch, typically maybe 10 or 20%, until the patch has a desired amount of habitat quality. Now, we also can value the weight value of adding a cell to the patch based upon not only its value of habitat suitability, but also whether it shares edge with how many cell share edges that it shares with the patch. So here's the example of a patch. It may be somewhat in the growth process. We identified the candidate cells in the perimeter, and we might choose some of these candidates in our next selection. And our choice is based upon the cells that share two edges are better than cells that share one edge, except that, of course, it's a combination of a factor times shared edge plus the suitability score. So there can be reasons for picking cells that are kind of separate. And if we once we've done that, we end up with maybe a patch that looks like this. It's avoided, the patch growth algorithm has avoided poor habitat. Maybe this is a riparian area. Kit fox, the San Joaquin kit fox, is not found in riparian areas. It doesn't visit them in general, primarily because it gets all of its moisture from its prey, mice and gophers and so forth. And it gets not only its moisture, but it's a nocturnal animal. It's found it hunts at night. So it's not subject to high temperatures during the day because it's in an underground den during the day. So here's an example of two patches that were generated. Because I don't have very much time now, this figure represents 350 patches. And then the idea is that this can be used as a basic decision-making unit on the landscape for the kit fox. That is, all of these are biologically defensible areas, these 350 patches, for the kit fox. What we want is to then create a solution which represents a certain number of these patches that overlap a little bit, but not too much. Overlap is reasonable because that's what kit fox do. They oftentimes visit their neighbors and share a little bit of DNA. What we have defined so far, a set of planning units called patches. Each patch is designed to be viable enough to support a demographic unit. It could be a population of quail, or it could be a mated pair of kit fox. Hundreds, if not thousands, of patches are generated, each starting on a seed cell. Prospective patches may overlap. And if you will, it's important to consider cost. And we solve an optimization problem. Here, it's where we do represent separation and patches can overlap some. We can select up to so many, we want to select up to so many patches. The two counties wanted approximately 12 patches. So we want to select 12 patches to represent the reserve design. We got to separate them enough, and we can optimize the biological value as well as minimize of our selection the cost. And we come up with a trade-off curve that looks like this. This is OPUS. The OPUS model represents the optimal habitat patch selection model. And in the case, this is for 12 patches of solutions. This is the trade-off. It represents the perimeter to area ratio. It represents a sort of a surrogate measure for habitat quality, because the patches are large enough and so forth, but the more compact they are, the more perimeter, the smaller the perimeter of the area ratio is, the better. And so we can optimize both cost and perimeter area. And what we want to do generally is focus on those that have perhaps the best trade-off between cost and habitat value. So here's the lowest cost alternative for the 12 patches, and here's the cost. And we do have a model for connectivity, but I need to call it end. So I'd like to conclude with macro spatial optimization models can help target the most efficient plan to represent species among selected sites. Mesospatial optimization can be used to calculate the maximum carrying capacity of the landscape. And microspatial optimizations can be used to design reserves that support desired target levels of species like the San Joaquin kit fox. And with that, I thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor Church, for your fantastic lecture. It's very stimulating and insightful. Now we have several questions on the Q&A box already. The first one say, how do you reconcile the notion of biological conservation in a specific place when everything else around that place is subject to changing conditions? And another related question is, how do we conserve species in a world of accelerating change at a global level that impact every single species?
Let's see. I said at the outset that I wasn't going to talk about global change, but this is a very, very fair question.
Yeah.
First of all, let me say that some species are far more resilient than we think they are. When I started out, the San Joaquin kit fox, we thought, and we were told that urban areas were so is a disaster for the kit fox that there's no way that kit fox can even survive there. And roads are also roadkill. They're roadkill at night. They're sort of like a deer in the headlights. Now, 10%, from what I understand now, 10% of the San Joaquin kit fox is now found within the urban area of Bakersfield. And you probably think, wait a minute, how could that happen? Well, they need grassy fields. They need that are not plowed, and so forth. And so, where do you find the kit fox in Bakersfield? You find them in school sites where there's nice grassy areas. There's a great place for den sites under portable school classrooms. And in fact, the California has a law that says you can't use insecticides on school sites. So these classroom buildings are infested with fleas, and but they can't do anything about it because this is a threatened and endangered species. So that they've sort of set up shop in these school grounds. And they also have been known to change their diet a bit. They're now eating leftovers from McDonald's and so forth. And so sometimes we think that animals do not have any resilience. And I look at this San Joaquin kit fox as a good example of, number one, not really fully understanding how much resilience they have. And number two is that they defied the best expert opinion in terms of what is their most suitable landscape. There's we can't figure out a reason why they've moved into it other than they were exploring and they found these places and they decided to stay. Now, that aside, what I'm really trying to say here is we don't know a lot about what the impact for various species are going to be. Now, there are some we do, butterflies and certain kinds of insects and so forth, we do know. And we also know for certain bird species. But lots of species, we really don't know what it's going to take to survive a changing landscape. We do know that species are moving, maybe upslope for cooler temperatures and so forth. And of course, we know that at some point in time, if that's the case, there's going to be certainly species that are going to disappear faster than we would otherwise see. So what my take is that we need to forecast the best we can in terms of how the landscape is going to change, in terms of coverage and temperatures and precipitation and so forth, and also focus on what we think is necessary for a given species, and then estimate over time how those changes are going to impact their environment as well as their core habitat. It's a tremendously difficult problem, and there are a number of people that are working on this. I do just want to state that I was involved a little bit with the Sonoran Desert Conservation, multi-species conservation planning. And one of the species of concern there is a Cactus ferruginous pygmy owl. And what they're trying to do is protect the pygmy owl by taking the landscape of saguaro cactuses, of having no more than they have a housing density that you can have this landscape of cacti, and you want to have no more than one or two houses per 5 acres. Anything more, it will disturb this very, very small owl. But if you talk with a naturalist and say, tell me about the history of the ferruginous pygmy owl, you'll find out that in the 1800s, the Cactus ferruginous pygmy owl wouldn't have been named. I mean, it's now called the Cactus ferruginous pygmy owl, but it was really just the ferruginous pygmy owl, but it was found in cottonwood stands along riparian zones. So we're trying to protect something that certainly wasn't their habitat many, many years ago, but now appears to be one. So we have species that are going to be very successful, but we also have species of concern that will not. And that should be a concern to us all. And it's something that's a focus, that Rachel Carson was all about. And I read her book when I was a college student, and I considered her to be a founding leader in this field. And I really we have a real struggle now, because although it's not DDT as a significant concern, but now it's potentially every species that might be impacted by climate change.
Well, thank you so much. The next question is, say thank you for the great talk. For the first problem, SCP, the species set covering problem. What if we have, say, a kind of bird, they need to migrate 1,000 miles to breed offsprings? Then the offspring will travel back to the original place. And in this case, if we don't consider the lifestyle or life cycle, but only preserve the minimum number of conservation hexagon, we may not achieve the goal of species protection. The question mark is related to, for those migratory species which have wintering site and breeding site and stopover site, how can we coordinate those kind of conservation efforts?
Thank you for that question. That's a great one. That means that to protect let's say we're talking about a specific bird, okay, that might be flying from South America to somewhere in the North America, and along the way it oftentimes stops at certain places, maybe we call them flyway locations. That if we just protect the site, its nesting site in North America, and we don't protect places in South America, we've got a problem. But more than that, I would say that the coverage, I picked the simplest coverage model that that conveys issues of selection and so forth. There are some covering applications that represent this very problem you're talking about, where not only do you want to protect nest sites and maybe their winter location and their summer location, but sites along the way. And in order to consider protecting a given bird species, you have to protect each, a certain number of these midpoint locations, as well as their sites of winter and summer nesting. And let's see, Malcolm and Ravel have a paper on that that was published in terms of doing just exactly that particular problem.
Great. Another related question is that the TNC species state covering problem and spotted our habitat examples had only biological constraints. Have you analyzed the national level reserve site selection problem to maximize species habitat size subject to constraints on either A, budget for site acquisition, or B, political feasibility?
Well, the answer to that is no. For several reasons. Number one, you can only do so much, and I have I have other areas of research that I've been working on as well. But there's one of my concerns with the TNC is that you need more than just one area for a species. You need to represent it several different times, if at all possible. And so, as soon as I worked on this problem with my colleague Ross Gerard, I then embarked on saying, how would we solve the problem if we wanted to ensure that we could have at least two sites or three areas that we could protect across the country for a given species. And that is a paper that I published in Geographical Analysis quite some time ago, because I found the problem was a lot easier to solve than originally thought. And I produced a series of rules that if you used it, you could actually solve the problem to potentially optimality without using a lot of sophisticated software other than these rules that I was able to define.
Yeah, thank you.
But the issue is that you're asking for the quintessential goal. We really want to do exactly what you're saying. That how would we do this, or have I done it? But that's what we would really like to be able to do. Unfortunately, our knowledge base is not very good in terms of what it takes for a given species, for many species anyway, to protect it, and also whether places, parcels are going to be available 10 years from now or 5 years from now. And the risk we face in not making a lot of these decisions now without all of that understanding is very high. We should be making some of these decisions without all of the understanding, because it may be we will foreclose on a lot of options if we don't.
Yeah, thank you so much. We're already 12 minutes past the hour, and there's still several questions. I know some people are in the East Coast, there's lunch time for them. Do you want to answer one more question, or we want to stop
Oh,
here?
I'm perfectly happy to answer as many
Okay.
questions as you have.
Okay, great. So the next question is, how do we optimize multiple objectives that do not necessarily respond similarly to landscape conditions?
Oh, that's a really good question. Multi-objective optimization is designed just for that. That is, we want to if if you have a problem where the objectives are really um, you optimize one objective and it optimizes the others as well, there's no reason to do multi-objective optimization. Multi-objective optimization is really meant to help you find the trade-offs between these competing issues in whatever that kind of problem might be. It could be land use, planning, and design. It could be lots of other problems, but your decision variables in the model help reflect the changes of that particular objective. And so in the objective function, which is a combination of in your model, your multi-objective model, which is a combination of several different objectives, you can optimize these separately and at the same time handle the other objective. For instance, let's say you have a two objective problem, you can easily constrain one objective to be have a performance of certain level and optimize the rest. And then you can ratchet up that constraint on that one objective, so you can end up generating a trade-off or a trade-off curve or a trade-off surface between all of the possibilities. And this is something that I've done in a number of different circumstances for both industry and government.
Great, thank you. Another question is that how much of the state level GIS maps of imperial species influenced by the intensity of scientific observation?
Could you repeat?
How much of the state level GIS maps of those threatened or endangered species influenced by the intensity of scientific observation? I guess maybe is how scientific research may, influence the species distribution or the status. Sometimes when we do too much research on an area, that may actually affect the habitat of species because we create a disturbance to the species. This is my guess of the question.
Yeah. This is an interesting question. Certainly, I remember a concern, a threatened species called the snail darter on the Little Tennessee River, found in the Little Tennessee River, that was going to be dammed. Um, um, it's called the Tellico Project. And it was the first test case for the Endangered Species Act in terms of actually listing an endangered species, one of the first test cases. And because there were several biologists and other people wanted to stop this producing a dam that would which would destroy this habitat. Uh, at the time, they didn't know that the habitat was more extensive than just on the Little Tennessee River. But during the process of trying to do an analysis, the Tennessee Valley Authority used a net that had a chemical on it that killed the snail darter that they were uh, knitting and trying to study their population. They figured out that they destroyed probably maybe 20 to 25% of the existing population at that time by just by their by stupidity, if you will. But this all you always have to worry about what you're studying and how much disturbance you can do. Um, the I could go on with other examples, but I'm sure my answers would be far less cogent as compared to some of the biologists that have been doing this for a long time.
Well, good. Thank you so much. The last question. We already 20 minutes passed, so maybe if you can address the last question, that'd be great. So have you worked on models that include habitat suitability in terms of continuous value in selection with multiple species? And it seems like usually people work on just binary value, presence or absence. So in your case, or to your in your work, have you done habitat suitability mapping that contain the continuous values?
Well, the kit fox is one with continuous scale, but you're talking about multiple species, right?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
No, I have not, and there's only one reason why that I haven't is because most of the time when I haven't gone out looking for problems, most of the time the problem comes knocking on my door, and most of the time the people are that whether it's from the Forest Service, a private forestry company, or a county, and so forth. Most of the time, they're interested in taking a keystone species because they recognize that if they are able to plan for a keystone species, there's a there's a whole host of other species that they will be protecting. For instance, the San Joaquin kit fox, there are a number of other species of concern and actually on threatened lists and so forth, like the San Joaquin pocket mouse and um, and other and other small mammals as well as snakes and so forth that are found in the same habitat. So that um, if you're working with a keystone species, you're likely to be doing multi-species planning anyway. So that gives me a bit of comfort, but in general, um, I've worked on keystone species like the fisher, the spotted owl, the San Joaquin kit fox, and so on.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Church, and for your wonderful lecture and the answers to the questions. And also, I want to thank the audience for participating this lecture so actively. So we have to say goodbye now, everyone. So thank you again. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.